Thanks for joining, council member.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm en route to an event, so I'll just be on for a couple minutes.
Great. Hope it's a good event.
Good evening, everyone.
Oh.
Good evening.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. We have a few people who are still signing in here, so I think we'll give them a moment or two to join before getting started. I apologize in that this is the only platform in which I use WebEx, I think. So I'm sometimes a little bit unclear about how all of the controls work. It looks to me like we are being recorded now, though, which is good. So if we could just give folks 2 more minutes, we'll get started at 20 after, if that's okay. Let's see. All right. Thank you all for joining us this evening. This is the Community Board Aid Land Use Committee MCROWN Subcommittee meeting of May 18th, 2022. We beginning the January of this year, we kind of made an effort to.
I have another bulb for.
If you are not me, if you could please mute yourself, I would appreciate that. I have no ability to mute you. And Greg, I think you may be spilling over a bit into the audio. So we made a kind of a practice of trying to bring the committee together to meet every couple months, and this is our May meeting. A lot has happened since our last meeting, and we're anxious to hear about it. But before we get underway, I would just like to introduce the chair of the Land Use Committee, Sharon Wetterburn, to ask if she has any comments she would like to share.
Hello, everybody. No comments in particular, except to say that I'm glad to see that you're here. MCROWN has been something that the community board has been working on for quite some time, and we're looking forward to present and future collaborations to realize this vision that we've set out for the community, to have a place where there will be manufacturing, that there will be affordable housing, and that our neighbors will have the opportunity to walk to work. So I thank you for your presence, and Gib, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. I think the biggest news since the last time we met in March was number one, the approval of 2 private applications together with a landmark agreement with the developers for affordable housing and other community benefits, and an announcement by Councilmember Hudson that there was a commitment from the Department of City Planning to move forward with a neighborhood plan that would incorporate the MCROWN district. So we're delighted to have Councilmember Hudson join us this evening to tell us a little bit about both of those developments, and I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you, and apologies again. I'm en route to an event, so I'm only on for a little bit, and wish I had a bit more time to be on. But I do want to share that, city planning has committed to moving forward with the rezoning effort along the Atlantic Avenue corridor, I'll call it, which includes the MCROWN area, but isn't limited to or exclusive to the MCROWN area. And I know that Jonah and Alex from City Planning are on the line, and so you know, I'll let them add in anything that I may inadvertently leave out. But we are aiming to launch next month in June. We're still working out the structure of how this, you know, group or steering committee working groups will be formed, but I think the model that is under consideration is going to include a steering committee and then working groups, a number of working groups that will address issues like housing, open space, streets, street design, things like that. And those working groups will be open to members of the public. And we don't yet have a timeline for exactly, you know, when those working groups will commence, but this is definitely going to be a process that is labor intensive, that's going to need folks who are, you know, deeply committed to the rezoning and to the mission of the rezoning and to making sure that it's a community driven plan, and you know, that we have as many voices at the table as possible. I think that is all I have on that, but I do want to kick it off to, oh, and one other thing that is important to mention is any of the any new proposals or applications, I should say, in the in this catchment area we've put a notice out from our office that we're not approving anything until we get through the full rezoning plan and process. But certainly, you know, we're also in touch with the community board directly if any applications happen to make it. But city planning is also aware of our intent there. So just want to make sure that's clear. And I guess Jonah or Alex, I don't know if you all have anything to add specifically from the city planning side.
Yeah, thank you so much, Councilmember. First, I just want to thank you for your leadership, and we're really excited to start this next phase of our work together. And we really view this as a continued collaboration, both with you and also with Community Board 8, the Community Board 3 as well. And we look forward to broadening engagement. And I would just echo what you said, that we're kind of at the early phase of thinking through how we kick off the study, how we engage folks around specific topics, many of which we've already heard, particularly safety issues along Atlantic Avenue. So yeah, we're really happy to join you today. And Alex, feel free to add anything.
If Alex doesn't jump in, I think one thing that I just want to reiterate is, we have always, or I'll say that I have always been clear that this should be, sort of bottom up and not top down. And so that's why we haven't yet finalized the structure, because we're trying to figure out, we're looking at the way these plans have been done in the past in other neighborhoods like Bushwick, for example, that have embarked on projects like this. And so we're trying to take everything into account in terms of structure, and making sure that, all stakeholders are at the table in the most sort of transparent and open way possible. So, I'm happy to answer any questions that I can stay on for, and then happy to follow up. I think everyone has our office email, but Andrew, I think, is on the line and can drop that in there if folks want to ask specific questions or have suggestions or recommendations for plans that they've seen happen successfully. We're also consulting with other groups that have led these types of rezoning efforts. So I just want to make sure that's clear.
So, Councilman Hudson, we really appreciate those comments, and I do want to ask one question up front, which is some of the working groups that you mentioned parallel the committees of community boards. How do you see community boards being involved in this? And how will they relate to these working groups?
So a couple things. One, community boards 2, 3, and 8 obviously will all be invited to participate in the process, and members of those community boards will likely be on the steering committee. I've always been really clear about, I think community boards are great, but community boards do not reach everyone. And it's my goal to make sure we're reaching as many people as possible. And so I would say that community board members, we certainly want community board members to be part of these steering groups, but they certainly won't be limited to community board members, if that makes sense. So if there are members of those committees that want to be on these working groups, and obviously, we'll have some experience and expertise on the topics, then I encourage that, and I think that's great, but they're not going to be limited just to community board members.
Understood. I think potentially the community boards themselves, as participants in the ULURP process, will also need to involve their own committees. So I think one thing that could help make this successful is to make sure that as this is being set up, there's an alignment there so efforts are not duplicated and we have a smooth process later when ULURP gets underway.
There will definitely be alignment, and we are in regular communication with all of the affected community boards.
Are there other questions for Councilmember Hudson? If you could please raise your hands, I will call on you. Salvador, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I just logistics in terms of when will we be hearing announcements and how in terms of like organizing these working groups and trying to get on them and whatnot.
So we're aiming to start, to launch the steering committee in June. I don't know anything beyond that. Honestly, we just haven't gotten that far yet. And so I think once the steering committee is established, then things will probably, things will definitely pick up from there, but I think it'll be sort of in the hands of the steering committee to sort of move things forward, of course, with the help and participation from my office and also from city planning.
Thanks.
And we'll be sure to keep people informed. I think our office will certainly send out regular communication about where we are and everything. And we'll be doing like recruitment for the working groups. So you'll definitely hear about the working groups for sure.
Catherine, could you just introduce yourself and then ask your question, please?
Hi, I'm a member of Community Board 9, but I'm Crystal Hudson's constituent. And I'm just very concerned because the plan you have laid out is very heavy in process, and we are in the middle of a housing crisis, and time is of the essence that we start building in high opportunity zones like MCROWN as soon as possible. And I hope as you consider this process, you really weigh those two goods against each other.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, we're trying to move as quickly as possible. I mean, one of the many reasons why I even ran for office was to make government more accessible to more people and to make government more efficient. It's hard to do that because, government is historically, and still is not particularly efficient, but I've been very clear with city planning and with the other agencies involved, including DOT, that, thank you, that, hold on just 1 second. I've been very clear with all of the agencies involved that we're trying to move this as quickly as possible. And we don't want anything to be delayed, and so I hear you, and I thank you for that. And I think, hopefully as long as we can get people who are really engaged and willing to show up to the meetings and do the work, then we can continue to move things forward as quickly as possible.
I believe that Robert Callahan was next. Would you like to go ahead?
Sure. And just because he didn't show up, but he's definitely got his hand raised. I think it's a weird phenomenon. Peter Crashes has also got a hand raised. This one can be for Councilmember Hudson, or it can be for any of the agencies that are represented. I really apologize if this is duplicative, but I wanted to be absolutely clear. Do we have, I'm not asking for a commitment, but if there's anything like a ballpark on a timeline that you can give us today, and also just like very clearly, do we have anything approaching what the deliverables from this process are going to be? Is it a zoning text amendment? Is it some sort of other additional sort of like capital improvements or other things that are going to be recommended? Like what are we hoping to get out of this?
I'll let city planning speak to more of the technical pieces. I know this will yield like we'll have to go through a ULERP process and all of that. There will be an environmental impact study. But in terms of timing, like I said, we're aiming to launch with a steering committee in June, and then create the plan, the structure, the timeline next month in June, which realistically, just also given like the community board schedules, I know folks take off, I think either in July or July and August. So realistically, may not start up again in earnest until the fall, but the steering committee at least will get started next month, and we'll be moving, trying to move things forward as quickly as possible. But again, we still haven't created the structure, for this. So establishing the structure, the steering committee, and then turning it over to the steering committee to then move forward, figure out the working groups, the necessary working groups, engage all the stakeholders, recruit people to be in the working groups to sign up so that we can then hit the ground running. That's all I can sort of offer right now.
I'm just going to interject one question here just to clarify. There's been, so far we've talked about the structure that will be created to kind of do the community engagement for this plan, but who do you see determining what the scope of the community engagement is? What subjects need to be covered, and at what depth in each of the community boards? Who will, that sounds like a necessary piece to do in order to establish scopes for the working groups.
I think right now, we're having those conversations internally, my office and city planning from, or the land use division from the council side. And again, we're referencing other projects that have been done similarly in other neighborhoods, the structure that they've had in place. So all of that is being considered.
And then the piece about deliverables, is there an answer on that one right now?
Yeah, can city planning weigh in on that, Jonah or Alex, just in terms of what that will actually look like?
Yeah, maybe I can start, but Alex, jump in. I think we're at an early stage. I think we're looking at, broadly speaking, a holistic area-wide plan or neighborhood plan that includes kind of a bread and butter of land use actions, rezoning, other land use based tools. And then in addition to that, looking at capital investments both in MCROWN and ways of supporting other priorities in the surrounding neighborhoods. We're also looking at service or programmatic opportunities as well. And so this is really a deep collaboration with other agencies. Alex, do you want to jump in? Yeah.
No, that was great. We're going to bring the whole gamut of city agencies forward and work with neighborhood organizations to understand the needs both of existing residents and future residents of the area.
Okay.
I can take like one more question. I've arrived at my destination, so I'm happy to take another question if there is one.
Okay, Peter, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, thanks. Well, I was actually going to ask about geography, and I know that I know the MCROWN, what the MCROWN district is, but in terms of like capital investments and in terms of other kinds of programs, and I recognize like if there's different working groups, they may have different geographic scopes, but like just in terms of capital investment, can you define where that might be? And then maybe like city-owned land proposals, would that be something that could extend beyond the community, beyond the sort of defined MCROWN district?
Yeah, so just to be clear, this has always been a proposal for the entirety of the Atlantic Avenue corridor, as I call it, basically from Flatbush to Bedford Avenue. That goes beyond the MCROWN district. So the MCROWN district is included, but we're talking about an area that is not exclusive to the MCROWN district. So that's why we're involving community boards 2 and 3, which are on the north side of Atlantic Avenue, and have not been, engaged on the MCROWN stuff because it's not in their districts. But this will be, particularly as it pertains to DOT and the streets, this is a full investment in that whole corridor on Atlantic Avenue, and that's what I've been very clearly pushing for, and that's what the administration has committed to. We've also, as part of this process, we've put out, we've identified, I should say, city-owned property, which includes or city and state, I should say. There's an MTA parking lot and building, I believe, right under the shuttle train line further down on Atlantic Avenue. I think PS3 has been identified as an underutilized building on the north side of Atlantic Avenue. I don't know if Brian is on the call, but he might be able to speak to, or somebody else from city, from land use and the city council might be able to speak more to that. But there are a number of city and state-owned properties that we've already identified, particularly to build 100% affordable housing potentially. And so, yeah, this area, the catchment area, goes far beyond just the MCROWN district. You're muted, Peter.
Would it include, like, because you mentioned this is sort of Atlantic Avenue corridor line, on either side, I think it's great to go into community boards 2 and 3. Will this also extend up into community board 9? And will the city, will you be kind of going through some kind of a process of determining if maybe there's other ideas for city-owned properties or anything? Will you be taking a look at those as well?
So it's not,
yes, but
it's not going to go to community board 9 because they don't cover Atlantic Avenue and sort of the immediate blocks in that vicinity. And in terms of, suggestions, listen, this is going to be a publicly driven, community driven process. So, once we start it, in earnest, absolutely people will, there will be an opportunity, plenty of opportunities for people to make suggestions, for people to identify, locations, properties, city, state owned, what have you. And that's all going to be part of this process is, feedback, input, engagement, recommendations, leaning on the people who know the community and their neighborhoods and their specific blocks the best. I'm gonna run, but I know Alex and Jonah will stay on. Andrew, unfortunately, is staffing me, so he's gonna have to be with me in a minute. But again, if there are any follow-up questions that people have in the immediate, feel free to reach out to us at district35@council.nyc.gov, and we'll make sure. We wanted to come to this meeting because it was an already scheduled meeting, and just provide this update. But like I said, we're going to be jumping off in June. Hopefully, that's what we're aiming for. So we'll definitely be reaching out to folks and look out for further communication from us on this. And thanks to Alex and Jonah for being here and fielding any of the other questions. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Councilmember Hudson. We have a couple more questions we'll go ahead with on this subject. And if others have questions, you're welcome to raise your hands as well. Sarah Lazar, would you like to go ahead?
Hi. I was hoping that I was going to be able to ask Councilmember Hudson how they were going to be making the determinations about who was going to serve on the steering committees and on in the working groups. Tenants are the majority of this neighborhood, and I very much hope that tenants are going to be, I mean, if anything, tenants are the people who are the most vulnerable to displacement based on decisions that our city agencies make. And so if anything, I would hope that tenants, especially those who are most vulnerable to displacement, like low-income tenants, tenants of color, I very much hope that they're going to be overrepresented in all of this because they have a right to have a say in the future of the neighborhood.
John Buchholz, would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Well, the moment for a question has passed, but I just wanted to say that there's currently 0 affordable units either for sale or for rent in your district, Gib, and I'm just hoping that the process includes and seeks to engage stakeholders who would be interested in living in the neighborhood rather than entrenched interests. And I think that a long, attenuated technocratic process is sort of antithetical to the idea of encouraging that. But that's all I have to say.
Kathy Island, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Gib. Can either Jonah or Alex comment on Sarah's, what Sarah said about tenants being represented on the steering committee? Because I agree that what she said is super important, and it'd be great to hear what city planning is thinking along those lines. Thanks so much.
Sure, thanks, Kathy. I would echo first what the council member said. We're still thinking through who would be part of the steering committee, how, when it'll meet, how often, and but I think broadly speaking, the intent is that it represents the voices of the community, especially those who've been involved. So I think we can take that message back to the council member who's helping take a first stab at what the steering committee looks and feels like, and if there are specific folks that want to be involved, we can also relay that too. But I think the intent is that it fully represents the interests and issues of the community, and that includes tenants, first and foremost. And I think it's also closely tied with the goals of MCROWN, looking at realizing a vision that is a mixed-use community that includes deeply affordable housing. So yep, I don't does that answer your question, Sarah? Maybe we could take that back as well.
No, I mean, I think it sounds like the process hasn't been fully determined yet, but I think it's important. I for one am glad that they're taking the time to think about how they're going to go about this, because it's really important. And low-income tenants are not necessarily the people who turn out to community board meetings all the time, or who get chosen for appointment to various unpaid positions, et cetera. So thinking really hard about how you include people who usually don't get included is just really important. So if any, I hope that'll be communicated to the council member. And
I do want to mention that I think the question of affordability, which John raised and Jonah raised, is a really important one, and it goes to how the scope for this effort is defined, because really right now today we have a landscape with MIH that's fixed, and one of the things I think that we'll need to understand at an early stage is whether there is some deep affordability requirement that can be that can be a requirement as opposed to an option, which is how MIH is currently structured. or if we're doing anything to try to add deeper affordability, which is badly needed in this part of Brooklyn. Let's see. I do not see any other hands up right now. I guess I'm just going to ask Sharon Wetterburn if she has any other observations or thoughts to add on this before we move the agenda.
Give no, not at this time.
Okay. Hopefully we'll be hearing more about this in the weeks ahead. I would say, Sharon, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's a fair statement, though, that right now the community board knows as much about this process as everyone in this meeting does, based on what we've just heard.
That is absolutely correct.
Let's now go to the next part of our agenda, and I'd like to introduce Ben Margolis, who is graciously offering us his time this evening to talk a little bit about the opportunity for mixed use tenants, light industrial tenants in mixed use buildings in Brooklyn, which is obviously a core goal of the MCROWN initiative. Ben, let me turn it over to you. And let me know if you have something you want to be able to share on the screen as well.
No, Gabe, no, just want to thank you for the invite. Very happy to act as a resource. Just a little bit on me. I've spent almost 30 years in economic development, including with the city, most recently as executive director of a nonprofit, Southwest Brooklyn Industrial Development Corporation, where it supports industrial companies and the local workforce in communities like Sunset Park and Gowanus and Red Hook, and also helped to define the Gowanus mixed designation that was written into zoning as a result of the Gowanus neighborhood rezoning, and doing some advising now with creative industry complexes back in Gowanus. So just here to help you think through and come up with ideas for defining, tenanting, supporting the production and good job producing universal uses that you've imagined already in the type of buildings that you've imagined. And happy to talk through any of my recent work and answer questions, but very nice to meet everybody.
I guess maybe we can start with what you see as types of businesses that are moving into Brooklyn in taking light manufacturing space now. Like for instance, with what kind of businesses did you have in mind with Gowanus Mix, and what you look to see occupy some of those spaces?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as the community board knows, a lot depends on location and the building type and all those type of variables. But I looked at the MCROWN use groups, and during your discussions on 870, 880 Atlantic, and thought about some criteria for businesses that I thought could work in a building like that. And so businesses that have a history, one, of providing career building skills in Brooklyn that are based in production of goods versus solely services, and that are really seeking space in Brooklyn either due to growth or being priced out of other areas due to rezonings and other market factors, and that would potentially find MCROWN space appealing. Also wanted to understand which uses would find a storefront space at street level somewhat appealing as well. And I think kept coming back to users who may want to both make and sell in the same space. So think about a sort of subset of maker and studio uses, what I would call creative industry uses. And these include, and certainly not limited to, publishing and printmaking, exhibition design, ceramic makers, textile design, jewelry manufacturers, musical instrument repair, video and photography, food production. And I'm seeing those type of companies certainly all around Brooklyn growing and looking for space even in a very trying time. Certainly want to think about food and beverage companies, but you want to understand how those would interact with particular spaces. I think beyond just the market and what's available, I certainly want to, I would want the community board to think through, how these spaces and users would actually be attracted. What's the tenant recruitment strategy? Who are you partnering with on support and enforcement strategies? And how do you help owners of spaces in MCROWN really get particular spaces ready for particular types of tenants? And I think all of that needs to be balanced with, where the city, I think, traditionally has, and Jonah can probably speak to this, has traditionally had not concerned, but wanted to make sure that, use groups weren't being too dictatorial and you were remaining as flexible as you possibly could. But those type of creative industry users of where I'm certainly seeing in the local market, Central Brooklyn, parts of South Brooklyn, that are continually looking for upgrades in spaces.
Mm-hmm. And if I might ask, what do you see as the rents that those kinds of users are able to pay today?
Yeah, I think it runs the gamut. It's interesting. People tend to immediately think that a light industrial user can't pay $20 a square foot, but they can. I mean, you have buildings in Gowanus, even though that's a different market, that are paying, there's creative industry complexes there that have an average of $30 per square foot in rent. So I think we need to get a little beyond the idea that the universe of users that you've certainly identified, and I think can probably be further refined, can't pay a certain amount. But then you have to weigh that with your policy goals as well, because as you know, a lot of these companies can't compete, right, for market retail space, but they produce quality jobs and career building skills and career building opportunities.
And so what would you see the delta, like let's take Gowanus as an example, and it is a different market, but what would you see the delta between what these, light industrial sort of creative businesses can pay versus what a commercial tenant like an office or a retail tenant would pay?
It's forever the tale that residential beats commercial beats industrial, right? On average. But I think we'd want to really look at particular types of spaces in very specific locations. And I think that's an easier way of understanding a range of rents that are going to work.
So I see we have a couple of hands up. We'll take a few questions. Kaya, you have your hand up. And then Kathy.
Hi, Ben, thanks for joining. The kinds of businesses that I want to go back to the goal of MCROWN, right? Which is to create jobs in the community. And I was wondering whether, based on your experience, you can talk a little bit about the kinds of jobs or the demographics that would be working in those industries, creative industry. One thing I think that was an original goal is also to create jobs for people who are not college educated. And some of the things that you mentioned don't sound like that target group, but you have probably more experience. Can you speak to that?
Yes, thank you for asking that very important question. So at SBIDC, we were also a workforce development organization. We were the only mission-driven organization to run one of the city's workforce centers out of the Brooklyn Army Terminal. So by definition, we were helping folks who were under and unemployed find work in the industrial sector, because the industrial sector traditionally did a couple of things. If you think about quality jobs, what's the definition of that? It's jobs that are accessible to folks who have maybe not the highest education level, maybe are challenged by language barriers, and maybe have spent time even in the criminal justice system. So the industry itself, I really feel like that's why an SBIDC existed. That said, if you're targeting, let's say, the next generation of folks, young adults, who, if you really look at a place like Sunset Park and dig deeper into employment numbers, it's those folks that are really underemployed, the 18 to early 20s. So we ended up creating our own training program just to expose young adults to these type of jobs, some of the jobs and categories of jobs that I listed. I think, so to just say we're going to create space and we're going to invite companies in does not hit all of your policy goals. I think you also need to think about, from a neighborhood planning perspective, partnering with organizations that do this type of work and training work and exposing, let's say, young adults and folks who have been out of the labor market for a while to even the career paths and the opportunities in light industrial and production.
And it would seem like workforce development would be an important non-zoning component of the neighborhood plan for this part of the district.
Absolutely. And, you could look at where Gowanus ended up with their points of agreement and some of the investment that the city is making due to partnerships with the city, but also at community advocacy around funding training programs specifically to answer your question. Yeah.
And perhaps Jonah or Alex could actually speak to those some of those commitments in Gowanus with respect to workforce development.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question though? So do you have a ballpark number or rule of thumb for how many jobs per square foot, or what the square footage is that these businesses are looking for? Because that will also play a big role in thinking about the rezoning.
It really depends on the type of business, but if you're targeting production, creative industry type uses that also with some job density, they can run the gamut, but they usually can fit into smaller spaces. But it's also the type of spaces, it's the amenities of those spaces, right, that are going to make it easier for these types of companies to operate. And remember, they might be operating also in a residential building. So you have to think about that criteria of space as well.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to give Jonah the opportunity to talk about workforce development as a component of a neighborhood plan, if he would like to.
Sure, thanks, Gib. Yeah, I would echo what was said, that we view workforce development as a really key part of this plan, and I think it can help complement the policy goals, as you stated, about zoning, help fill in the gaps and make it help achieve the goals of job placement, especially for groups that we're trying to reach in and around MCROWN. I can speak to some of the elements of Gowanus. I don't want to get into the weeds a bit, but I would say that as part of the points of agreement, which is kind of the final list of commitments by the city, we did include funding for grant programs, as well as some support at the city level at the Department of Small Business Services to help kind of manage that. And that was both for the area in Gowanus that was rezoned, but also, as Ben knows really well, to support the adjacent area south of the rezoning area that's part of the IBZ, or the Industrial Business Zone, for those who are unfamiliar with that term. And so like that, supporting both the existing businesses there was an important component of Gowanus, in addition to the spaces that are being generated by new development.
And I'll just add the example of East New York, which we committed to developing a Workforce One Center with small business services out there as well, and other investments, capital and expense investments in the East New York IBZ. So an example of that as
well. Kathy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thanks so much. And I think Jonah may have just said something about it, but I'm interested, it's a little bit following up on what Kaya said to a certain extent. I'm interested in if there's any effort made to I'm going to use the word rehouse, or to replace the existing businesses that will be displaced by the development? I mean, in my walks in the MCROWN district, there's, you know, there are all sorts of existing businesses, motor shops, repair shops, ice companies, party rental, storage, all sorts of different things in these places. And if we're concerned about workforce and people who live and work in the neighborhood, I would imagine that those are a lot of those people. And so, Jonah, you may have just hit on this about something that you worked on with Gowanus, but I would think that that would be important in these efforts to maintain the businesses that have been in those neighborhoods for a long, long time. And I'd just be interested in hearing philosophy on that and how that works. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question. And I would say at a high level, we look at it from a multi-pronged approach. So it's in it, you know, it's what Ben and myself were alluding to as what programs the city can bring to the table, and what can we do to partner with organizations to assist those businesses. And I think another important component too is how the land use framework or how zoning can support those as well. And a great example of that is how, as part of the framework, we set aside, you know, the area around 1000 Dean and GMDC as a non-residential area. And that was very deliberate because that's where we saw a cluster of existing businesses that we felt was important to support. And so I think it's, to answer your question, it's a combination of tools and strategies. And I think we, at a first step, we want to take a closer look at all of the businesses in the area. And I think that's an important part of kind of the next phase of our outreach and engagement.
I think in addition is what those businesses need to survive, right? Some businesses require different operating needs than others. Some need loading, some need certain types of parking. So all of that is essential to think about from the very beginning, because just preservation of companies and space is one thing, but actually supporting them and taking into account what actually would make them successful, I think, is essential as well.
So just again, thank you both. Again, the council member and Andrew unfortunately had to get off, but one would hope that some representatives of those businesses are part of the steering committee. That would seem to be super important, that those are really active and voices in this. And I really appreciate your answers. Thanks so much.
Phil, would you like to introduce yourself and then ask a question?
Yeah, thanks, Gib. Just a resident in the neighborhood, and I just wanted to ask a question about just vacancy rates of light industrial compared to just broader commercial. I know a lot of the newer buildings that have been built in the area, I'm not familiar with what their zoning is, but a lot of the commercial space has been vacant for quite a while. So how does that compare with such a smaller subset of zoning that is allowed for these spaces?
So I'll take the first crack at it, and then if Ben and Jonah and Alex have more to add, they can. But when we're very much looking at the use restrictions as you know, taking a sort of a cross subsidy from the market rate development. That has been something that has been a part of the MCROWN strategy from the beginning. So part of what we're doing in requiring a certain percentage of floor area be use restricted for these types of tenants is effectively to give them a lower price point for rent than a commercial business or a retail business might pay. Now, obviously the price points are much lower at a place like GMDC, but I think you know, what we hear from them whenever we speak to them is, as soon as they can acquire new space, the space is occupied. They effectively have no vacant space at any time. So there is a tremendous demand for this space, provided that it's available, you know, at a rent that these businesses can pay. And when you see vacancy in other commercial spaces, which we do in the district, those are not use restricted spaces, and so they will tend to seek the highest and best use in terms of rent. I don't.
Thanks.
Ben, Jonah, do you either of you have any other comments on that?
I would just say, the industrial sector, it's hard to look at the sector because it's so diverse, right? You run the gamut from large distribution companies to the smallest maker. But generally, I'm an advocate for the sector and for small manufacturers. One, again, because of the quality job generating history and good employer history that they have in the city, but also because in mixed use buildings, they tend to be, though they're not your highest paying tenant, they tend to be your longest running tenants, and provide stability during times in the economy and the local economy when other markets, other uses are struggling a little bit. So I think, and you're thinking about mixed use here, vertical mixed use. So there might be a trade-off with a little less rent, but more stability for some future landlords.
Ms. Lemley, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Oops. Hello. Hi. Yeah. So thank you for joining the meeting tonight. I'm like with Kathy and Kai, like as in I live in the MCROWN district, actually in the district where 5 developments are happening as we speak within the perimeter of like 2 blocks. So I live in a residential house that has been just rezoned to mixed use, and next to me are small businesses like carpentry shops, and we are like the hotspot right now of developers like really wanting to build. So my hope and my question is just like, is there also a plan to help actually like small business owners who own actually the property to be protected from like increasing property tax, to just be able to keep in place instead of sooner or later having to cave into the developers selling their property? Because that also, I understand that change is inevitable and we are in a housing crisis, but I also really live on a block that's been pretty much destroyed right now, and where I feel the carpentry shop next to me can't really load in or out anymore because the construction trucks are blocking the street. Our block hasn't been street cleaned because there's double parking. I constantly have flat tires. So I just wonder, or not wonder, I just would love for everybody to take into consideration that there are like people living who do want to stay here, who lived here all like for decades, who earn their livelihood within the neighborhood. And I understand that it's beautiful to think of small businesses, but we have existing small businesses here who seek to actually sustain, survive during these years to come of development. Like I know I'm going to be surrounded by development for the next 10 years to come on my block. I'm on Pacific Street between Grand and Classen. And it's just very sad for me to hear all these philosophies, but when it comes to the action of protecting also small businesses who don't want to sell, I would love to see some framework to support them as well. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, I guess start by pointing out the properties near you that are under construction right now were private ULURP applications, which did not come with any agreements from the developers for non-zoning community benefits. I don't know if it would have been possible to get the kind of benefits from them that you're talking about, but clearly with the neighborhood-wide plan, we can think a little bit bigger. So that's it's more of an opportunity. I guess I would like perhaps to ask Ben to comment on what you've seen in terms of existing businesses being supported through some other programs that become part of a neighborhood plan.
Yeah, it's it's the reason why again an SBIDC exists, a GMDC exists. So you have a partner around the corner in GMDC. From a policy perspective and an advocacy perspective, can help come up with programs that support not only business owners but landowners that also operate their business out of their property, which there's a lot of, I believe, on the streets around Atlantic Avenue in the MCROWN district. So I think it's worth from the very beginning reaching out to those organizations that already exist and do that type of advocacy work in the city as the neighborhood planning exercise gets off the ground. And then, of course, I think city agencies are a partner, but I think you have to engage in those conversations quite proactively from the beginning of the process. But in terms of large tax policy, that's something much larger than a neighborhood rezoning. But there are tax incentives and there are support programs and organizations that already exist that I think this community board and others that will be involved in the planning process I would encourage you to reach out to in the early stages.
On that note, like Alex, and everybody, let's put that on our agenda for future meetings to keep the property business owners in mind and our reach out thank you.
Jonah and Alex, do you have anything to add about experiences city planning has had in neighborhood plans? I know that there are anti-displacement services that become a part of plans that address the challenges tenants face, but is there anything comparable for business?
I would just add to what Ben said, that I think we start from a baseline of reaching out to existing businesses and understanding what their needs are, what support they need, if they own the property, if they intend to stay in the neighborhood and scale up. I think that's a critical first step for us, and we could maybe think together and collaborate on how to best do that with the support of the community board. In Gowanus, I would add that we did have a dedicated working group on industry and economic development, which was really helpful earlier in the process. And as Ben knows really well, we kept in constant dialogue with SBIDC and other organizations like Fifth Avenue Committee. And so I think that's another key part of our work as well.
And I'll just add to that we're gonna bring other city agencies to the table to have a lot of good creative thinking about ways that the government can be responsive to property owners and business owners as well. So it's a combination of city agencies and local nonprofit groups that have the know all the neighborhood conditions, and we'll be working together to solve some of these issues.
The challenge here is that you don't have an industrial business zone right next door to a rezoning area, as you did in East New York and as you did in Gowanus. But you are in between different advocates and different IBZs. So inviting an Evergreen, inviting an SBIDC, I think to be a part of this, I think they would be very open to being an advocate and a support and technical advisors on how to support existing businesses and not only support them, but help them grow and continue to establish themselves in the neighborhood.
Peter, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I just wanted to follow up on what Nick's asked earlier, because I thought maybe maybe there's there's a way to kind of think about this a little differently, because I think what she was saying was that the businesses in the area, because of the construction, were having difficulty operating, and that the property owners were having some difficulty. In my experience, because I live in a residential building inside of an M1 zone, with a 26-story residential building being built across the street, and have really come to the conclusion that there are certain kind of uses that, you know, they demand a certain kind of environmental condition to be supported, like they need loading zones or they need other things, and they're not necessarily compatible with each other. Like a 26-story residential building and a loading zone aren't necessarily compatible. And if you think about even Atlantic Avenue and what the council member suggested was the priority for Atlantic Avenue of like looking at safety issues. So I'm just kind of curious, like, I mean, and this is, I guess, it's something to be resolved for the future, but in terms of you dedicating specific kinds of uses for specific areas and thinking through the operational demands of the specific kind of sectors that you're suggesting, because I think that's hard to do. It certainly wouldn't be answered by creating a new space inside of a new building. That doesn't solve the problem. It's actually much more thinking through what kind of use is in the building that is going to work with the density of the building itself, or, you know, or the other imperatives you have for Atlantic Avenue. So I'm just saying, because I remember like a lot of the MCROWN discussion was often like community board pushing for more flexibility. I mean, with it wanting to have a wider range of uses possible in certain zoning districts, and the community and the city planning not having the zoning tools for that specific thing, or for they were trying to keep it really relevant to the specific zoning of as it exists in the zoning text. So I'm just curious how, when this starts getting opened up and different kinds of uses are available and different kinds of environmental conditions, where you know, how we do that, how do we think about that? Like what kind of uses belong where?
Well, I mean, I think there are certainly requirements and practices for loading docks, for parking, for these kinds of features that are known, and they can be considered for the uses that are being prioritized. I think there are some challenges in terms of integrating them into mixed use buildings, but and they may require some zoning type solutions. We have talked about some of that during MCROWN discussions, and some of the proposals that have come out of past discussions for the mixed use zoning do include things like relaxing the requirements for loading docks and parking. And I think that those kinds of zoning requirements for those uses are something that city planning is quite familiar with. So maybe I'll toss it over to Jonah and Alex if you have some thoughts on how to manage the intersection of the desired uses and mixed use zoning.
Sure, I would say that we're still a little early in that phase of the you know, I love this discussion on loading, and you know, I think we would, you know, take it in different levels in a sense of you know, what are the conditions on the block? So not just about what makes sense for new development, but also like, are there active businesses that are using trucks on that block, and to what extent does new development affect them? And I think we need to consider how it relates to different parts of the area as well. So like Atlantic Avenue, you know, we all know is an area that is, you know, with narrow sidewalks that we want to improve the conditions of. So like, what type of loading makes sense there? You know, maybe we want to minimize loading there versus compared to other parts of the mid-block areas that have wider streets and maybe can accommodate that. So to answer your question, I think it's something that we're starting to look more closely at. I think broadly speaking, we want to prepare for multiple types of uses, like light industrial to commercial, and understanding how all these uses are compatible with each other, especially if we're considering residential above in many cases. So I think it's, yeah, I think it's a multi-pronged approach. Beginning with what are the conditions on each block, what type of development we're considering, and looking at the streetscape both from a building perspective and also for how that street is being used.
Thanks, Jonah. Greg, Todd, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, I was just thinking about historically, I don't know if you know the history of Pfizer and how they became this huge employment operation, is they were the first ones to develop a batch process for making antibiotics, penicillin actually. And it became one of the biggest employers in Brooklyn. So I think looking to the future, what are those industries? And they're certainly not automotive. That are going to be, ones that are going to be huge in the future. And I'm thinking particularly of food and waste recycling, food waste recycling specifically. I was on at the Brooklyn Army Terminal and noticed there's a large floor there occupied by a group called America's New Farm. And they're actually growing food from algae, which I thought was given what's going on with the whole food system, with the pollution, with the degradation of soil, the rising costs of energy. I think that repurposing is a company called Renewable that's basically turning fertilizer out of food scraps. These are kinds of industries I think that we should really be thinking about and trying to attract to our neighborhood as a potential next Pfizer. I think that's something to be thought about. My 2 cents.
Is there any comment, Ben or Jonah and Alex, on recycling businesses, composting businesses, and
food businesses, actually?
I mean,
hydroponics, aquaponics, solar farms.
I think generally looking at the city's plan for investing in certain sectors, thinking about what's going to grow and what's going to be in demand when buildings are built, which is 5 and 10 years from now, is important. I think you need to be realistic about the heavier the use, the more impact and the more operational needs that particular company or industry has. And is that a fit in particular parts of what this catchment area will be? But you do have other parts of the city that are there for heavier industrial use, right? That's what an industrial business owner is very much for. But I'm someone who encourages as creative a mix and vertical mix as building technology will allow. And I think it'll be interesting to take a look at how the Gowanus mix buildings develop in the next couple of years. It's probably worth having conversations with developers there who have made commitments to house certain light industrial uses in their residential buildings and how they're thinking about that from a design and building technology point of view.
I would like to say that in our neighborhood, it's in Prospect Heights. It's not in a part of Prospect Heights that's in the MCROWN district, but we do have another small amount of M11 space here interior to the neighborhood. And we've had a couple of food businesses come in there. King David Taco is one of them. They've been very successful in that space. They do all of their marketing and production there, and they have like a sort of a small portion of the building where you can buy some of their tacos as well. But mostly it's production. And then there was another business that moved in on that block called Farm.1, which was like sort of as Greg suggested, they were growing hydroponic greens. Very exciting, really cool. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that was ultimately successful. Although I did visit it while they were in an operation, and it was very exciting. They had some unexpected financial setbacks, I believe. So it would be great, and those are uses that can be consistent in a mixed use building. In particular, what the hydroponic people are doing looks very compatible with mixed use. I do not see any more hands up right now, but I will ask if there's anyone else who has a question or a comment you'd like to share. If you'd raise your hand, we certainly have time to take one or two more. Well, I don't see anyone taking the bait on that one, so I think we're probably at a point where we can adjourn this evening's meeting. I want to thank Ben Margolis. I'd like to thank Jonah Rogoff and Alex Summer from the Department of City Planning, Councilmember Hudson and her staff for joining us this evening. And we will, I think, try to maintain our bi-monthly schedule for these meetings, although I'm not certain at this point what form all of this will take in the near future, given some of the developments the council member mentioned. But we do have a contact list for everybody. If for whatever reason you found out about this meeting through some mechanism other than our email list, you'll be added to our email list after this meeting. And so on behalf of Community Board 8, I think we're ready to wrap up. Sharon, did you have any final comments this evening?
I have nothing additional. I just wanted to thank everybody for their participation, and truly this is engagement.
Thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Everyone, I'm asking you to leave because it's being recorded and it will not conclude until everyone exits. Thank you. Jack, Catherine, Audrey, Owen, would you please exit the meeting so that the recording for the meeting can be operational? As long as you're logged in, it's going to be as long as it's going to take for the meeting to be recorded and to be available.